Hi, we welcome you. We're glad to have you here with us today. For some of you, this is our first gathering together, and we are super thrilled that you chose to be with us and greet our colleague, Mary Frances. We're going to start in a moment. This is a public conversation, so all that you share here will be on our recording, which we post to our website. At the end of our hour, we turn off the recording and open up some space for questions and responses that are a little bit more private. So love you to keep that in mind. My name is Tom Brackett, and Steve Matthews, my colleague Steve, and I have been hosting these conversations for almost 10 years across the church. We started with teleconference back in the day, and we're really glad to have you here today to join us as we continue to explore the heart work, the soul work behind redeveloping congregations. So if you're just joining us, we invite you to put both feet on the ground and straighten your spine, maybe put your shoulders back a little bit and take some few deep breaths in a row. And welcome the Spirit to come join us and fill the spaces between us. Invite each of us to open our hearts to each other. Get ready to be surprised. And open our ears to listen deeply for what is said and what is not said, and to get to know each other. Byron Katie has this beautiful saying. She says, if you knew how beautiful you are, you'd fall down at your own feet. And I love that saying. It's a lovely way of celebrating the belovedness that each of you is. And if you knew the colleagues you had here in this room, you would just get your pen and paper out and start writing down the words they share, because some of the folks here are far more qualified than any of us to lead the conversation today. So we're glad to have you. We meet every Tuesday at 2 Eastern, and each of these sessions is recorded. This is a venue for us to share what we're learning from the church at large as we host Genesis 2, Revision Renew, which is intentional work with practicing communities by cohort, by diocese. So we're thrilled to share with you what we've been learning from Mary Frances today. Pastor Mary Frances is going to speak in a few minutes, but before she does, let's just create a still space here by pausing in silence for a moment. And while we do, I invite you to think about what you might have to leave behind in order to be fully present to all that we will share with each other today. So take a moment. I'll pause in silence. Several have joined while we were there in silence. We welcome you, and in a moment, we'll turn to Steve Matthews to introduce Mary. In the meantime, we hope that you can just relax and take in what we're sharing with you today, and just see where the Spirit leads you in response to the words, the facial expressions, the body language, the vulnerable hopes that we share with each other. Really glad that you're here with us. Steve?
Thanks, Tom. It's great to be here today for me personally, because it's nice to have Mary joining us. Mary, I first met Mary actually outside of Phoenix way back when, and I don't know what year it was, when at a Genesis gathering. And she was working with the Episcopal Church at the time as a consultant. So that's when I first met Mary. And then Mary and I have had the privilege for the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 years to work together as associate consultants with FaithX, which is a data processing, data interpreting organization. The mission of FaithX is to help organizations survive and thrive in all times, but especially in turbulent times. And so I've had the privilege of working with Mary for a long time. We put her bio in the email that went out to you, so I'm not going to repeat that, but Mary comes to us from experience in the ELCA. And so she's been working with vitality and sustainability in congregations for a long time. And I'm excited for her to share some of her work and some of what she's learning and how that might intersect with our unique perspective as a Genesis 2 practicing community that's kind of based in forming communities of mutuality and relationship and taking the cues from our community about how we're called to redevelop. So I anticipate a lively and enthusiastic and invigorating conversation. And it's nice to have you here helping facilitate that, Mary. And I'll pass the ball to you.
Steve. Thanks, Steve. It's good to be with you and with Tom. All together, there's way too many years of knowledge there, but it's fun to share some time with you today. So as Steve said, I do work with him at FaithX. I also have my own consulting company, Francis Consulting and Coaching. And so I work across the country and across several different denominations. The ELCA is my first home and the Episcopal Church is my second home. And then it kind of goes from there, but I don't, have favorites. So I shared with Steve my plans for today, and apparently it's not typical that you start with a biblical reflection, but I would like to do that anyway. So let me share with you from Mark 2, 1 through 12. When Jesus returned to Capernaum after some days, it was reported that he was at home. So many gathered around that there was no longer room for them, not even in front of the door, and he was speaking the word to them. Then some people came, bringing to him a paralyzed man, carried by 4 of them. And when they could not bring him to Jesus because of the crowd, they removed the roof above him. When after having dug through it, they let down the mat on which the paralytic lay. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Child, your sins are forgiven." Now some of the scribes were sitting there questioning in their hearts, "Why does this fellow speak in this way? It's blasphemy. Who can forgive sins but God alone?" At once, Jesus perceived in his spirit that they were discussing these questions among themselves, and he said to them, "Why do you raise such questions in your hearts? Which is easier to say to the paralytic, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or 'Stand up, take your mat, and walk'? But so that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins, he said to the paralytic, 'I say to you, stand up, take your mat, and go to your home.' And he stood up and immediately took the mat and went out before all of them, so that they were all amazed and glorified God, saying, 'We have never seen anything like this before.'" So among the many things that I do as a coach and a consultant, I facilitate groups around what's called the 6 domains of resilience: visioning, composure, reasoning, problem solving, health, tenacity, and collaboration. And today we're going to just look a little bit about that part of resiliency that is collaboration. Maybe a little reasoning and problem solving mixed in there as well. And because this passage from Mark has powerful examples of all of that. Jesus is at home in Capernaum, and once the word is out that he's there, people swarm his house. There are people who followed him home, people from Capernaum, his neighbors, friends, family. So many people that no one can get near the door. And then along comes this group of friends carrying their friend who's paralyzed. He can't get there by himself, can't get there on his own. He needs their help, and they can't get in the door with the stretcher. But they would not be deterred. Do you have times like that when you just won't take no for an answer? I can be that way. Tom could tell you I can be that way. Hearing no just means that I have to circle around and find the back door. Now, people in authority don't always like it when you circle around to find the back door. I remember being scolded for that during my candidacy process. When something wouldn't work out for me the right way, I would find another way. Personally, I think that kind of problem solving is a gift, not an issue. But it often shows that there's more than one way to get things done. And that's why I like these friends. So this is about collaboration, right? They came together and they wouldn't take no for an answer. They circle around the back, they find the ladder to the roof. And as I'm sure you probably know, in those days, in that part of the world, a house like this would have a flat roof and a ladder, and people would climb up there to enjoy a cool evening breeze or even sleep on a hot evening. So they climb up the ladder and they remove a section of the roof and lower their friend down. I have to say, I was with them on the circling around, I was with them on the climbing up, and they got to the removing the roof part, and I was like, that feels a little extreme. But maybe that kind of out of the box thinking is what we need more of. Maybe the kind that comes from collaborating, the kind that comes from being in a group and having the support of others. So it seems to me that this story is showing us that that kind of out of the box thinking is a good thing when we're faced with a wall of people, a wall of problems, a brick wall, a wall of the way it's always been done, a wall. So before we dive too much further into our conversation today, I'd like you to put in the chat who, when you think about the people in the story today, the paralyzed man, the four friends, Jesus, the religious leaders, who are you in the story? Who do you relate to when you think about this particular passage? When you are faced with a problem, how do you find the resources you need to move forward? Who do you turn to when you need help? Who are you in this story? Go ahead, chat away. Okay, lots of people who feel like you're part of the friends. Religious leaders. And the paralytic, yep. Depends on the day, doesn't it though? Depends on the friends. Depends on who you can collaborate with. Rip off the roof because Jesus in the house. Thanks, Eric. Feeling paralyzed, needing others' help. Nice. All right, thanks everybody. Thanks for that. So I want to tell you a story about some collaboration that I've been up to. Thanks, Hunter. Sometimes trying to find innovative solutions. Yep. Quick solution, or do you have time for that collaboration? That does make a difference. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about some collaborating that I've been up to these last couple of years. In 2020, during the height of the pandemic, I started a group called New Paradigms. New Paradigms was, and I just say was because we're like on a hiatus right now. Sometimes you have to take a break from collaborating and actually work on the things that you have talked about. But New Paradigms was a group of leaders from churches and judicatories across the country and across a wide variety of denominations. I started this group because I felt called to support leaders who were facing challenges that they had never seen before in their ministries. And I wanted to create a safe space for collaboration, for people to try out new ideas, to get feedback, to get help refining those ideas, and create some accountability and hopefully share learnings with each other. So we met once a month via Zoom for about 2 years. And each month, someone would lead a time of prayer and devotion. And then someone else would talk about what they're working on, what they were thinking about working on, what they'd like to be working on, an article that they read. I mean, it just was very diverse and vast. And to be honest, it was a little rough going at first. Folks were guarded. There was kind of a lack of trust because people didn't really know each other and they were from so many different tribes. And so it was hard to risk and to not come with a fully polished plan for something. And even that if you had a pretty good idea of something, you might use language that someone from a different tribe didn't fully understand. And so there was some challenging that went on. There was maybe some bravado. And it just took a little while to gain trust and gain momentum. But eventually we did. And it was during that time we had Jerome Garciano from the Jubilee Impact Fund join us. And he talked about, the Jubilee Impact Fund focuses on community development through the support of small businesses, workforce education, and economic development. But Jerome believed that there was a place for the church in that. And that was what really kind of sparked my curiosity. He had this whole model that he had laid out. There was some debt forgiveness, but support of these small businesses. And even though I thought I was totally on board about, yes, there's a place for the church in this, when I pressed him, it just felt like the place for the church wasn't a very big place. And I wanted it to be bigger. So I took that conversation to a different group of people. So I gathered some colleagues in the ELCA, some bishops, and some directors for Evangelical Mission, and talked about this idea that I had, which was community revitalization through congregational leadership and investment. That we can do all the congregational vitality work we want, but if the community around us is struggling, you can only get so far. Eventually, you're gonna hit a wall, like the 4 friends did, right? You're just not gonna be able to take it any further. So in these conversations that I had, one of the bishops from Northwestern Minnesota Synod shared with me about a congregation way, way up north, almost in Canada. And a clergy couple had gone there, and the town was dying and the church was struggling. And one of the things they noticed really quickly was that there wasn't a place for gathering in the town. There wasn't a place for people to come together. So one part of the clergy couple kind of focused on the congregation, and the other half focused on the community. And that congregation opened a childcare, they opened a coffee shop, and they opened a brewery. And they brought that town back to life. They changed that community. So that's the kind of work that I wanted to be a part of, helping other people do. So that out of that was born what's called the Jeremiah 29 Project. And in its succinct description, the Jeremiah 29 Project is a 3-year immersive program to promote community vitality through congregational investment and pastoral leadership. So the leaders participate in cohorts with other leaders from across the synod, the same judicatory, each engaged in their own community-based project. So it's 3 years. We just started in January. We kicked it off. Year 1 is totally focused on spiritual practices for leaders and for congregations, and entrepreneurship. Year 2 kicks off with community organizing training, and then follows with community conversations, and by the end of that year, the identification of a project, and then year 3 is coaching through and into that project. So so that is a huge piece of collaboration that that I'm working on. We call it Jeremiah 29 because I mean, everyone knows that, you know, for surely I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. But earlier in that chapter, Jeremiah says, God says, seek the welfare of the city. Tells them to invest where they are planted, that, yeah, it's going to be a while before you get to go back, but you're stuck in Babylon now, but make the most of it. Have children, plant gardens, build homes, invest where you are. So it is seek the welfare of the city, Jeremiah 29:4. So I'm going to stop there and open up for some questions about what we're up to.
So I have a question. As you unveil and launch this plan for ministry, can you talk a little bit about what it takes to sustain the ministry, what part that might play in your thinking from 0 to 3? You know, there's always that weird magical number that is so false, that ministry is supposed to be self-sustaining in 3 to 5 years. But can you talk about that and your thinking and formation of what you're doing?
Sure. Well, I mean, I see this first 3 years as a springboard, as really it's the runway. It is not the end point, right? The end of the 3 years is just the start of something new that we hope will be sustained over a long period of time. Financially, sustainability is very much up in the air. I mean, that's why we keep saying this is a pilot. This is a pilot project, because we don't know. We don't know what anyone's going to come up with for their projects. So we can't even begin to think about what kind of funding might be needed for that. We are fortunate that the Synod has a donor who's supportive of this. How supportive? I mean, they're paying for me, they're paying for in some in-person gatherings, but when it comes to here's the projects we want to do, it's going to be about some fundraising and gaining support in that way. We don't have any illusions that some of these congregations could handle that investment on their own. So we'll be looking for community partners, we'll be looking for investors, fundraising, all of that to try to make that work. Is that what you were looking for, Eric?
Yes, anything you had to say was good.
You're too sweet. You're too nice.
Mary, there are a couple of questions. David Montgomery is asking about the term congregational leadership, encompassing both clergy and lay leadership, which regularly requires no small amount of collaboration and in and of itself. Wants to know if you can comment on about how these two constituent components are represented in the work you're doing.
Yeah, so starting off here, it's me and 10 clergy people. So we have 10 congregations invested who have committed to this. It was part of the application process, and we did have an application process. So we screened. Fortunately, we didn't have to turn anybody away, but there were some things that we were looking for, and the support of congregational leadership was one of those things that was absolutely necessary. So as we move out of the entrepreneurship and of year one, well, let me back up. Working on the spiritual practices piece in year one is essential for bringing the congregation along on this ride. Yeah, so that it's not just a leader who comes online once a month and we have these conversations and it's all nice, but that they're part of it from the very beginning in terms of praying together. Some are taking that Jeremiah text and using it on a regular basis in the congregation. Everyone's going to be doing their own thing in terms of communal spiritual practices, but something other than just Sunday worship is part of the plan. So that's the first piece. But then in year two, as those community conversations are happening, there will be a leadership team that gets, and it may be or the, as you would say, the vestry, but it may be a totally separate team that works on it. And again, depending on what gets birthed, it may need a really big team. It may need the entire congregation, which I think would be immensely exciting, to have something that engages across all ages and generations, So while right now the conversations are just with the clergy, that is not the intention for it to stay that way. Are you fielding those questions, Steve? I can't read all those comments while
Sure.
I'm talking.
There's just a lot of people expressing interest in this and how especially in urban centers, how it works. There's a question about how somebody wants to talk to it's Christy's interested in the people who are there to accomplish these things, like how you're going to harvest that conversation and how you'll share that information.
Can you repeat that?
Sure. Like the specific thing she says is we're looking at starting a coffee shop, and we have the preliminary setup for a beer garden, community garden, dog park, and would love to talk to the people who were able to accomplish these things and learn more.
Oh, okay, yeah. So far we don't have anyone who has accomplished anything because we're just starting. Although the folks up in northern Minnesota, Harkin, I think it's Harkin, Minnesota, but I can, if you jot me an email, mary@faithx.net, I can give you the name of that congregation so you could talk to those clergy people. But it's a very different thing in an urban setting than a very rural setting, because I think you have more competition thanks, Tom, in an urban setting. There's not going to be a place where there's no place for people to gather in the community. It's about people choosing where to gather in the rural community. But still the same conversations need to be had about what are the needs of the community. And that's the year two piece that's so essential. But we have to start with the groundwork, which is the spiritual practices and the entrepreneurship. Not everyone has natural entrepreneurial tendencies. In fact, I recently saw a thread on an ELCA clergy page on Facebook where somebody said, I think the ELCA puts too much emphasis on entrepreneurship for church planting. I was like, I don't really know how you could do church planting if you don't have, an entrepreneurial spirit. And there are pieces of entrepreneurship that can be learned. There are pieces that may be within you that need to be nurtured. And so that's some of what we'll be doing in year 1, so that we don't get to year 2 and have people who are too shy or too uncomfortable to go out and have these conversations and seek the input of others. So that's why it's all kind of interwoven.
Tim Hodap had his hand up. Tim, you want to unmute?
Hey, Steve, thank you. Mary Frances, I'm sorry I came a little bit late. I serve here in Connecticut, but was born and raised and came from Minnesota. And I loved it when I came to our little postage-sized stamp state and would say, shoot, I'd leave Minneapolis and head north to one of our parishes. It was an 8-hour drive one way. So I get the scrappiness of our northern Minnesota folks. I'm having missed that. I think I've gotten my answer. I was wondering about the spiritual practices before you're actually creating the project. So you've answered that. I'll definitely check things out on your website. Here's a wondering or a curiosity. At what point, and I'm imagining it's when we've prayed together, learned together, and now have gone through a year of, really trying things on from an entrepreneurial standpoint, that's when we might be reaching out to the community to test our ideas and validate them. Is that when the conversation with the larger community happens, like you described what happened in northern Minnesota?
So the larger conversations will start in year 2, but they won't be right away to test assumptions. They'll be to glean information and
Gather stories
and form relationships.
Sure.
Because those 2 things have to happen first.
Absolutely.
And then when you have some of that trust built and some of those relationships are deeper, you can come back and say, I heard this from you, and as a result, we're thinking about this. Or it could be, can we join you?
Right,
Right?
exactly.
It doesn't all have to be that we're going to start everything from scratch because we have all the best ideas.
Right. And would it be fair, I know within the Episcopal Church, we're working so hard to collaborate between our parishes so that, we build our bench strength. I'm guessing that's the same, especially where you have a lot of Lutherans like they do in Minnesota, where you're inviting close together congregations to work together.
Yeah, I could definitely be a part of it. One of the nice things about this is that the 10 congregations that are a part of this pilot, they are all over the synod.
That's cool.
Yeah, they're widely represented. So there's more opportunity for them to bring others along.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
And I wonder, Hunter, would you mind unmuting and saying a little bit more about what you're thinking there? You put some comments in the chat.
Are you talking about in urban settings?
Yes. The groups who
Yeah.
struggle to find gathering places because the mainline evangelicals don't quite know what to do with them.
Yeah, so what our experience has been is that a lot of 12-step groups, and especially not kind of mainline AA 12-step groups, but in AA or SA groups, groups that typically the church might be a bit nervous about because of something in their name. We've found that they're hungry for spaces to gather in. And so through word of mouth, really, our parish has become a gathering place for many different stripes of 12-step groups, and groups that number like in the 300s of people who are gathering on our campus. And so while we're not the beer garden, we are reaching a marginalized group of people who have found that in the pandemic, they lost their meeting spaces. LGBTQIA plus groups that are looking for a faith, what I call faith-laced space. So maybe they're not looking for a worship service, but they're looking for a supportive faith community that is willing to host them so they can do their work in the community. And we've gotten, I think now we have something along the lines of like 12 to 15 different groups meeting on our campus regularly. And so we have become this kind of gathering space in an urban center, but it's not the gathering space for like the whole of Metro Phoenix.
You have really established a niche for yourself, Hunter.
Yeah, we
and
have.
it's a really important one because people need those safe places.
Yeah, I agree.
Well done.
Mary, there's a question about a clergy-centered approach, and curious about finding ways to equip and empowering lay leaders for this work.
Yeah, this will, what we have laid out so far, and I guess I just have to like qualify that with so far, because we're kind of building the plane as we go. There's an outline and it's all a little flexible. So right now, the thinking is that it'll be trickle down, right? So that the clergy are the people who come to the cohort meetings and get the coaching, but then they take that back to the teams that they have formed to do the actual work. If we find that that's not sufficient and we need to do some kind of a lay training, that certainly could be added in. Nothing, I'll say, like at this point, it's very exciting because nothing's really been ruled out. And if we can show the need, I think we can get the financial support to do it. So it will be very interesting when we get more into year 2 to see if, when the rubber's hitting the road, if the congregational support is there the way it was represented in the applications. Because I don't know if anyone's ever, like read a congregational profile that didn't quite seem the way you read about it. It seemed a little different in person. So. Oh, none of you have had that experience. It was just me. Okay.
Mary, I have a couple of questions. One is there a way that you're going to show, or maybe you haven't gotten this far yet, but how will you show what you're learning along the way? Is there a place, will there be any kind of public forum where you're saying, oh, we're involved in this and this is what we've noticed, this is what we're learning, this is what worked, this is what didn't? Yeah,
well, the evaluation is going to be ongoing. So we'll be evaluating ourselves through each step of the way. Very invested in what's working, what's not working, what do we need to tweak, and acknowledging that we can change it on the dime if we need to. So for instance, we were going to have our communal group for communication be a Facebook group, a private group. But that meant then we found out, well, that meant we all have to be Facebook friends. And that felt kind of ick, like we're not really friends, we're colleagues, but we wouldn't have, if we aren't already Facebook friends, then, that feels artificial. And then we were going to use, I think we thought about Google Hangout, but in the end, we're using Google Classroom. which has so far been a good platform for what we need, where because there are like reading assignments and questions to reflect on, and a place where there can be kind of a discussion that's streaming, so people can jump in on it. So far so good, but if we get further in and it's not working, then we'll change it. The Synod is committed to regularly writing about what we're doing, which is motivated by one, the learning and the desire to disseminate, but also to show investors and donors what we're up to and how we're using those funds. So they'll kind of handle that piece. So like there's a press release that's coming out with the fact that we just started and who these 10 people are and who I am. And then as we get moving and have more to talk about, we'll be doing those sorts of things regularly. And then for sure, by the end of year 3, we will have some kind of a, whether it's at a Synod event or something in writing, to share the big picture of here's what's happened over these 3 years and what these congregations have to tell about it. You know, did what they worked on actually make a difference in their community, and did their congregations experience any change by investing more in the community than in themselves? Those are the 2 big questions on the table. You said you had 2 questions, Steve. That was just one.
Yeah, I was going to give a little space to jump in. My second question is, have you encountered any unexpected cultural shifts that you feel like you need to address so far, or do you anticipate what is countercultural to what you're doing that you think is going to be challenging to the congregations or the leadership?
Well, not yet, but I also wouldn't be surprised if that does eventually rear its head, kind of a but what about us type of thing. The timing of this is super advantageous because in this post-COVID endemic, not pandemic anymore, world, there are so many folks in the church who don't know what to do next. And so this was something that they kind of grabbed onto because they didn't know what else to do. And so that may prove challenging when the work gets harder at the congregational level. You know, the first year, aside from the spiritual practices, there's not going to be a whole lot asked of the congregation. But next year, it'll be really different. And by year 3, look out, all in, or, you know, or it's not going to work. So I do anticipate we'll have to sort through and work with folks on some of those, dealing with those changes, that the focus will be not where they're used to it. And I don't know about you, but in my coaching work, I still hear all the time people saying, when are things going to go back to the way they used to be? Never. It's not going to happen. So stop waiting. So this is a way to just totally turn things on its head. It's not about going back. It's about moving forward.
And for many of us, this moment we're in is actually kind of an answer to prayer, not the COVID part, but the idea that we come to the end of an era where clergy and the orders, misunderstood, have been teaching our average saints that they don't need to swim anymore. So one of the great challenges we could describe as teaching fish to swim again.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what does it mean to be a follower of Jesus in our local context, where our primary concern is for the health of the city, as you started out saying today, Mary? That is just brilliant. We can all have access to that. So end of an era, what a gift to all of us. And what is the opportunity that's here in front of us? It's specifically what you're doing there with Jeremiah 29.
Thank you. Yeah, it's you know, this bishop that I'm working with in this project, his perspective is things are really challenging for the church, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. So I think it gets worse for folks who are still holding on to you know, the past, and for folks who are willing to engage something different and try and see like what is God up to in the world and where can we join God in that work. That's a different approach, and I think can bring some new life. But we're maybe in the deconstruction period. You know, Thomas More says you have to deconstruct before you can reconstruct. So it's a little deconstruction time.
Kim Koger's got a comment about what happens when a congregation's not unanimously behind a project, but maybe you got 50-50 who want to go on the new project. And some of you have experienced the two loops model of living systems that we talk a lot about. And what I like about that is that 50% on either side is never forgotten, that there's a place and an opportunity for either one of those. But I don't know if you want to address that, Mary, if you have a sense that maybe you don't know yet whether or not these congregations are actually all in or not.
Yeah, we don't yet. They all profess to be all in. Like I said, that could change when reality hits. But I do think that there are ways to continue to engage the people who are not 100% on the bus. That we have to avoid what is so prevalent in our culture of, you know, you're with me or you're against me. So I'll just cut you off if you're not with me. So there's a total middle ground. I think it starts with that spiritual practices. So if people are grounded together in the same spiritual practices and part of the same spiritual life, that's a starting place that that changes everything. And again, that's part of the reason that we're starting there. I think it increases our chances of unanimity. At least I expect the Holy Spirit to do her part. So I guess I want to kind of turn it back on all of you and ask, what are some ways that you're investing in your communities, or that you could imagine investing in your communities in this type of way? So if you want to put something in the chat or raise your hand, Steve will call on you and bring you into the conversation. We'd love to hear what you're up to. A list of spiritual practices. You know, it's long and varied, right? It could be Lectio Divino, it could be prayer beads, it could be, I mean, not everybody's probably going to want to do yoga, but it could be prayer walking, it could be reading scripture together and journaling. There's just long lists, and what I've suggested is, so we, as this cohort of 11 of us, have a spiritual practice that we're doing together, which is Lectio Divino on that Jeremiah passage. And we're just going to keep digging into that every time we're together. Then they are going back, they'll have their own private spiritual practice and something that they start with their leadership. And then from there, that will fan out to larger parts of the congregation. So I don't know yet what that will look like for everybody. So what kind of ideas?
And Mary, another comment here from Mary Ann Brody. so much as about shared values and a shared understanding of who is included in your quote unquote congregation. So that sense of inclusion, what does it mean to belong? Are there many levels or kinds of belonging available in an emerging community like this? I mean, there certainly haven't been in our traditional models, unless somebody was willing to really stretch the bounds to be inclusive. But belonging meant a very particular thing, such that a visiting bishop would know exactly who belonged and who didn't. And now we're saying, actually, we're expanding our vision to include the health and the well-being of the city. Could it be that we're partnering with people who have that same sense of call by same spirit? And that because of the partnership and their commitment to that partnership, they really do belong. Is there room for that in your work? Or is there room to host that conversation in the work that you're doing, Mary? And if there is, how are you hosting that?
Well, to be honest, we haven't engaged that yet. And it's interesting when you first talked about that there haven't really been, in the traditional model, there hasn't really been space for
Right.
different kinds of belonging. But I think that there totally has.
There has, but not officially, not intentionally.
No,
Right?
not officially. But you have the people who come once a quarter, twice a year, the people who are super involved in everything, and the people who don't want to take any responsibility. There's all of those informal ways of belonging. And I think that has been really heightened by online worship. Because people who, these are the stories I'm hearing anecdotally, folks who are showing up in person discount those who are watching online. Like they're not really part of us anymore. And of course, the clergy person is saying, well, they're totally still with us. They're there every Sunday and they still give. And, I hear from them, we get prayer requests, whatever different ways they're communicating. But it's setting up a little bit of a caste system, you're in person or you're not. So I do think that is a conversation that is going to continue to need to be had and expanded. And right now, from what I'm viewing, it's largely the clergy leaders who are trying to navigate both worlds and not necessarily helping the people bridge them. Not sure how that's going to shake out. But I do think that, yes, the congregation tends to be like the body, right, in the church or online. And then now we're saying parish, right? So larger geographical. The previous bishop in Springfield, Illinois, started changing their language. Your Episcopal bishop, not at ELCA. He started using parish very, very intentionally, and not to mean just a church building, but the entire geographic area that a church serves. Starting to change that mindset. But he's not there anymore, so I don't know what happened. But I thought it was interesting when he got it started.
There's so many great comments, and we're going to save these and post them because they're powerful. Tina offers an example to your point, Mary, about shifting our focus by using this new language. In other words, reclaiming parish. And Tina offered a couple of great examples. I hope you get a chance to look back at. Really lovely, Tina.
Thank you.
There's so many great examples here across the line. Do you want to say anything about it, Tina?
No, I guess I just have questions about kind of how how us in the diocesan office can kind of come alongside these communities, help them to sort of reimagine what's possible, given the sort of kernel of ministry that they've already started, but really reorienting the emphasis of the ministry from, let's do Sunday worship the way we've always done it, to what's the community need and how can we bring worship alongside that. And I'm just, we say things like that, and then we get kind of deer in the headlights, crisscrossed eyes, like, what are you talking about?
Can we get a witness? We're all in there with you, Tina. Exactly. So I find it so helpful quarterly to go back and read Peter Block's Community, the Structure of Belonging, because he has those 6 conversations in there. And of course, the first one is always invitation. So this might be the conversation between diocesan support team and the new venture that you're describing. And perhaps it is this mutual invitation embodied in the question, would you bring us along with you? Diocese can say that to the new ministry can say it back to the diocese. It can go both ways. Can we bring you along with us? Are you willing? You know? And then what might that mean? What does it look like? And it can start with baby steps. What about Bob style? But baby steps toward a new way of being in relationship with each other, where the authority is all relational. So that when the bishop does visit, and Lord knows we hope she does, they honor the partners just as much as the pledging members. That's always an awkward moment when the local leader is saying, you are full partners. And then when the bishop comes, they have a private meeting. Like they all went into executive session. So how do we break out of that? That's, I think, a lot of what you're talking about, Mary. How do we shift the language and host a new conversation? But your comments here are just brilliant. Thank you, all of you.
Yeah, I look forward. I hope I can read those before you sign off, or as you send them to me afterwards.
They'll be saved. Just to put a link for the video and the chat, they'll be saved in a Dropbox folder with all of the recordings from other sessions, so you can review those there.
Great, thank you.
I wonder, as a checkout, Mary, you tell me what you think about this. Just having people post, what's one thing that excites you or makes you curious based on this conversation we've had today?
Oh,
Is that okay?
that'd be great.
Just post it in the chat. Mary, I wonder if you would, if you have any closing words for us?
Well, I do want to say that you don't have to do a whole 3-year program to make this a possibility in your world. But the part that you can't short circuit are the conversations in the community, right? That is the one piece. So that it's just so imperative that we move out of a doing for to a doing with understanding of how to be in relationship with the folks around us. You know, I have so many folks in the church world who will say, our church is super involved. We give money here and we give money there. And money is important, don't get me wrong. But relationships are even more important. So I just really want to encourage you to be having some of those conversations that Tom talked about, beyond invitation, but really learning about the people around you and what their needs are and how you can walk the road together. So thanks for having me. Again, my email is mary@faithx.net. If you want, I can send you, there's kind of a couple page write-up that gives a little theological background for what we've done and lays out the program. Be happy to share that with you, or any other questions that you have.
Beautiful. Thank you, Mary.
Mm.
Thanks to each of you for showing up and putting a face on the beautiful ministries that you serve and bless with your presence. Feel free to be in touch with us over the next month between now and the next second Tuesday gathering. So many of you are incredible resources to the church at large. So if you see somebody whose comments have touched your heart, please feel free to reach out to them directly. And we will, as Steve already said, we'll post a recording and the comments fields to that Dropbox as soon as we finish. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord, and let's have some fun while we do it. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you,
I'm
Mary.
going to turn off the recording and linger with you if you have any questions.